Pfingstdialog. Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, danke für Ihr Interesse, dass Sie heute hier noch teilnehmen. Ich hoffe sehr, dass hier keine Disziplin notwendig ist, sondern dass das eine Freude für Sie ist, wenigstens phasenweise. Und um das zu erreichen, werden wir hier unser Bestes geben. Weltwirtschaft quo vadis ist unser Thema und nicht, es ist ein Zufall, dass es draußen jetzt gerade zu donnern beginnt, aber vielleicht hat das auch miteinander zu tun. Wir werden unter anderem diesen Aspekt probieren, ein bisschen auszuleuchten. Und ich darf Ihnen in diesem Zusammenhang die Dame und die Herren hier am Podium kurz vorstellen. Zu meiner Linken befindet sich Helen Todd. Herzlich willkommen. Ja, danke schön. Die Frau Todd ist eine Expertin für Social Media, auch für Marketing und Medien. Sie hat eine Agentur mitgegründet und ist jetzt auch CEO dieser Agentur, die ihren Sitz in New York City hat und die mit dem Namen Sociality Squared unterwegs ist. Sie werden uns einiges zu den neuen Medien, zur Digitalisierung und so weiter, zu den neuesten Trends und wie das mit der Ökonomie im Zusammenhang steht, beleuchten können. Danke dafür. Ich bleibe gleich auf der Seite drüben und begrüße Herrn Fritz Fekete. Sie sind Gewerkschafter, trotz dem Namen, der ja ein bisschen steirisch klingt, habe ich mir sagen lassen, Sie sind geboren in Ohio und sind bei der Pennsylvania State Education Association und das ist eine, sage ich, Bildungsgewerkschaft. Und Sie sind ein Kämpfer für die Arbeitnehmerrechte und vertreten sozusagen diese Fraktion, wenn ich sagen darf. Herzlich willkommen am Podium. Zu meiner Rechten darf ich begrüßen den Ökonom Michael G. Plummer. Er wurde Ihnen ohne dies schon präsentiert. Nochmal herzlich willkommen. Professor am Bologna Center der Johns Hopkins University. Und ja, wir werden in der Weltwirtschaft, werden wir Sie sehr brauchen, um Ihren Rat zu bekommen, wie es weitergehen soll. Und last not least, Michael Friedl. Ich hoffe, es hat hier jeder seinen Fanclub mitgebracht. Aber Michael Friedl ist Handelsdelegierter für die USA. Und ja, danke, dass auch Sie sich die Zeit nehmen. Wir haben ja mit Ausnahme von Herrn Fekete, darf ich verraten, in der Insieme-Gruppe 5 uns eng abgesprochen, wie wir das hier jetzt abwickeln werden. Nein, ist nicht wahr. Aber wir haben uns ein bisschen was aufgehoben für jetzt, damit wir alle daran teilhaben können. Und ich möchte mit Ihnen beginnen, Professor Plummer. Weltwirtschaft quo vadis. Wenn wir uns ein bisschen umsehen, dann erinnern wir uns daran, dass das TTIP-Abkommen zwischen den USA und Europa vorerst auf Eis liegt. Die ökonomische Partnerschaft zwischen USA und dem asiatischen Raum, also wir wissen das nicht so genau, da können Sie uns vielleicht näher ins Bild setzen, aber die ist auch gecancelt von Präsident Trump und wir sehen jetzt offenbar einer neuen Ära des globalen Protektionismus entgegen und ich frage jetzt einfach einmal, ist das so, werden wir auch in Zukunft in der kurz- und mittelfristigen Perspektive immer mehr ökonomische Abschottung der einzelnen Wirtschaftsräume erleben oder ist das Projekt globalisierte Weltwirtschaft auch angesichts der Digitalisierung unumkehrbar?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll do my intervention in English. Oh, my own. Okay.
You haven't to do anything.
Just there we go. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So thank you very much. The question about quo vadis with trade policy, I think, is a very good one because we certainly seem to be seeing a strong backlash against globalization of late. And I would argue that this really comes to the basic nature of also EU-US leadership globally. Martin Wolf in the Financial Times, perhaps I was reading on the plane yesterday, wrote to say that the U.S. now is exiting from a world it created. And so it raises a lot of questions about what this leadership is going to be because U.S.-EU leadership has been so important over time. And I think, first, it's very important to contextualize it, because the world economy is very different than it was, say, 50 years ago or earlier. The US and the EU no longer are as dominant as they used to be. In fact, when I started graduate school in 1981 at Johns Hopkins, the US and the EU together came to about 1/2 of global output. Today, that has, it's fallen over time, such that when I retire, hopefully in 15 years, it'll be about 1/3, about as much as East Asia, right? So we've got different players, and different things are really influencing these changes. And there really hasn't been much leadership to push things along. And all of a sudden, we're seeing a new trend that is to resist this. And I think that this has become the narrative in globalization lately. But we have to look at, we don't have time to talk very much about how effective the global economy has been for, say, global poverty, et cetera. And I think it's been actually quite good. But we still have to come with the reality that it creates winners and losers, and we do a very bad job of compensating the losers in this process. So I think that this is a policy challenge that we have not come to, and I think this is one of the reasons why we see this backlash against globalization, is that there has been not a very good policy initiatives in either the US or the EU as a way of compensating these the losers from this process and helping them reintegrate. And I think that is key, not only for trade, but as we were mentioning earlier, for especially technological change and automation, because these have had a far more vast effect on the US and EU economies than trade has had. So I think that looking forward, I personally think that there are, you've seen in the narrative, the anti-trade elements have been very strong. Some of them come from a more nationalistic camp that we see, I think, from the current administration. Others came from the left, say from the Bernie Sanders camp during the election last year. I will have everyone recall that in the US campaign, essentially no major candidate supported the TPP. In part because of this negative narrative and these problems. Yet, what we're seeing is, globally, you're seeing that Asia, for example, is organizing itself to bring down these barriers. Asian regionalism is very different than it has been in Europe. In Europe, it was very much top-down. Let's face it, in 1957, the EEC, where the governments came together and started the beginnings of what would be a customs union and then a common market. In Asia, it's really coming ground up. There's a very strong demand for it on the part of the private sector to reduce these barriers to trade, to facilitate supply chains, also as a way of integrating least developed countries into this area. So what we're going to be seeing is these initiatives are going to continue to go forward without the United States. The TPP is moving forward without the United States. The 11 countries have already starting the process, et cetera. And so the question is where the EU and the US are going to come down in this debate. Now, I think that something like the TTIP is more important now than it has ever been, because of this need to have some sort of leadership, because of a need to sort of write laws that are very important for the global economy. This would include laws for the digital era, but also laws sort of that would protect labor. Like in the TPP, at least there is a chapter that is binding in terms of making sure countries respect the Declaration of Protection of Labor Rights, creation of unions, and these sorts of things. The TPP 11 going forward, there's no guarantee that that will last. Certainly the other Asian integration programs are not going to have those sort of clauses. So I think this is a way for the US and the EU to come together and to create an agreement that could actually be lasting and have a fair agreement. But I don't think, over the long term, I don't think that there's going to be any substitute for the need to be able to better integrate workers into the workforce via training, via wage insurance, via other aspects of trying to do this. When I was at the OECD, we had a joint study with the ILO and the World Bank and the WTO, and this was one of the only things we agreed on. That trade can be good for employment in the longer term, medium and long term. In the short term, however, it's disruptive, and what's needed are active policies, government policies, in order to make sure that we have greater equity, but also efficiency. And I think that is a challenge over the long term. Yeah.
But comparing the education system in Europe and in Asia, on the one hand, on the other hand, this problem you mentioned about winners and losers and the integration of workforce must be even more complicated in Asia. This must be a greater problem, isn't it?
Interestingly, Joseph Stiglitz made a very interesting point. Joseph Stiglitz said, okay, I'm interested in free trade, but what needs to happen with free trade is that the pace of liberalization has to be such that jobs created are faster than jobs lost, right? So you have to have that buffer. And if you think of it, in Asia, what we see is that if you've got rapid growing economies, it's easy to do that. I mean, one needs a social safety net, and certainly the Asian countries realized this when the Asian financial crisis hit. But it is easier to transform your economy when you are rapidly growing, and that's an advantage. Okay. If you look at Europe and the United States, that advice by Stiglitz goes completely against politics. Because if the economy is growing rapidly, there is no political demand for liberalization. It ain't broke. Why fix it? So what do we end up doing? We end up doing that liberalization at the worst possible times. In other words, when it is broke.
Okay, thanks very much. Ich möchte Fritz Fekete fragen, denn es liegt jetzt einiges am Tisch, das durchaus auch die Arbeitnehmer betrifft, weil es ja darum geht, inwieweit kann man einen möglichst großen Teil der Bevölkerung in diese Entwicklung der immer stärkeren Digitalisierung des lebenslangen Lernens und sozusagen dieser Bekämpfung auch des schwachen Wachstums auf diesen Wegen, wie kann man da die Leute mitnehmen und integrieren? Ja. Ich lade Sie ein bisschen Ihre Erfahrungen in diesem Zusammenhang zu schildern.
Ja, danke. Ich glaube, dass, obwohl ich könnte auf Deutsch antworten, ich möchte auf Englisch
You're welcome to do it in English.
Bisschen leichter. Yeah. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's a great honor, and I appreciate it. The era of globalization, although we believe that all of the signs are pointing to its demise, that globalization is over. Why? Because Donald Trump says so? Because Le Pen is courting the workers in the north of France? Because Geert Wilders claims that there's too many immigrants in the Netherlands? I would say that we have globalization. We will continue to have it. What we have to do as humans is to make sure that we're protecting the workers. And by workers, I don't mean, es gibt in the German, the Deutsche Arbeiter und Angestellte. In English, blue collar and white collar. When I say worker, I mean everyone who must go to work and accept a check and has an employer. That's a worker. And the problem that was very clear in this Trump election was that the worker has never been at the table in all of this globalization that has happened over the last 30 years. We have corporations deciding, okay, our profits are not sufficient because labor is too expensive. Therefore, I'm going to move to another country or to another situation. And the government says, oh, you're free to do so because we must not restrict commerce. That's not the American way. We want to ensure that commerce continues. But what's forgotten in all of this equation is the worker. And the worker is blamed in America, for example, for being the cause of the movement of commerce to other countries. For example, I grew up in a town called Youngstown, Ohio. It's between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. It's part of the Stahlgebiet, the ehemalige, steel center of America. This area once had over 1 million steel workers. Today, maybe 1,000. Where did those jobs go? They all went to China because of the outsourcing of steel, Mexico, Southeast Asia, etc. And when we all looked around as the steel mills closed, beginning in 1980-81, who was to blame? Well, the steel companies told us that we were to blame because we demanded too much money, that we demanded too many retirement benefits, we demanded too many days off. Therefore, the steel company could no longer make a profit. They had to seek another place to do business. So all of a sudden you have 1 million people out of work. What do you think is going to happen? Trump was able to tap into this exact phenomena because all of those towns between Cleveland and Youngstown and Pittsburgh, central Pennsylvania, Michigan, Detroit, Wisconsin, all of the places where this Trump phenomena took effect are all places where industry left for China, Mexico, Southeast Asia, etc. Trump says, well, I'm going to give you your jobs back. Another phenomena, in southwest Pennsylvania, coal miners, right? Maybe there's 25,000 coal miners. Trump said, I'm going to give you your jobs back. I'm going to open up the coal mines. Well, the question I'm asking is, who wants to go down into coal mine anymore? I mean, really? And then secondly, the reason that the coal industry is done is because it's inefficient. And it's no longer really part of modern economy. But he was blatantly plucking at these folks' heartstrings to say, I'm going to give you your jobs back. And because of the overarching effect of globalization and the feeling that the worker has never really obtained a piece of the pie, he was able to, create that influence. And now, jetzt haben wir das Zeug.
Ja, aber da muss ich schon nachfragen, denn ich glaube, wir sind uns einiger, ich weiß es nicht, aber dass Trump, auch wenn er die Mauern noch so hoch baut und wenn er keine Handelsabkommen mit anderen Teilen der Welt möchte, dass er trotzdem diese Jobs eben nicht zurückgeben kann an die Arbeiter. Und da wäre die Frage, was erwarten denn die Arbeiter von Ihnen? Denn Sie sind ja Vertreter der Arbeiter. Und trauen Sie sich, ihnen zu sagen, es wird das alles nie wieder geben, ihr müsst umlernen, ihr müsst viel mobiler werden, auch im Kopf. Es wird eine lebenslange Herausforderung sein, mit dem Tempo des Wandels, speziell in der Wirtschaft, mitzukommen. Und ihr müsst das machen, und das ist die harte und bittere Medizin, die allein euch hilft. Oder, denn man hat in Europa oft den Eindruck, dass Gewerkschafter ihre Rolle schon auch anders definieren. Und ich sage jetzt natürlich ein bisschen provokant, ähnlich wie Trump, dass die Gewerkschafter sagen, es gibt rundherum irgendwo böse Mächte, die euch die Jobs wegnehmen wollen, aber wir werden euch schützen, solange es geht.
Ja, ja, gut. Erstmals, natürlich sage ich nicht zu der Arbeiter, du musst deine bittere Medizin nehmen.
Ja.
Natürlich sagt man das nicht. Man sagt, wir müssen uns kollektiv zusammen verbinden mit Solidarität, weil nur dann haben wir eine Stimme. Und wenn andere Leute, so wie die Trump und die Right Wing und so weiter, probieren uns zu splittieren, dann verlieren wir alle. Und das sage ich zu den Arbeitern. Ob er glaubt mir oder nicht, das ist das Problem. Weil dann sagt er zu mir, hey, du bist Fake News, halt die Goschen und so weiter. Aber, aber was ehrlich ist, ist, dass die einzige Sache oder der einzige Möglichkeit, dass wir als Arbeiten, wie meine frühere Definition, wir müssen zusammenhalten und sagen, das ist genug. Ihr nehmt nicht mehr von uns weg. Ich habe eine kurze Geschichte, ich möchte erzählen. Ich war in einer Bar in Washington. Für eine Treffung, wurscht. Ihr kennt Abercrombie und Fitch, okay? Das ist ein Kleidungsgeschäft. Dort sitzen neben mir zwei Handler von Abercrombie und Fitch. Und sie reden über ihre Fabrik in Bangladesch, die sie verlassen muss. Und das war ganz näher der Zeit, der Bangladeschi Fabrik verbrannt hat. Und 150, 180 Leute sind ums Leben gekommen. Kannst du es erinnern? Und Abercrombie, die zwei Leute haben gesagt, ja, das Problem mit dem Feuer, jetzt wird die Lohnkosten in Bangladesch mehr sein. Und wir müssen Bangladesch verlassen, weil wir können das nicht mehr leisten. Und ich schaue an, bin ich verrückt? Sind die Leute, sind die Kaufmänner, sind die Corporations so kalt jetzt, dass sie nicht einmal leiden über Leben von Menschen und nur diese tiefe Kalkuliere machen, jetzt meine T-Shirts werden zu teuer sein.
Ja. Dankeschön. Ja, ich möchte es überleiten zur Frau Todd und es hat nicht nur vielleicht Trump gesagt, die Globalisierung ist vorbei, sondern ich habe auch im Spiegel unlängst gelesen, Globalisierung ist was Altes und das, was kommt, ist Digitalisierung. Also das ist eigentlich die Zukunft, die uns bevorsteht. Und nachdem Sie aus dieser Branche kommen, frage ich, inwieweit Sie glauben, dass wir durch die sich verändernden Technologien so viele neue Jobs schaffen werden können, dass wir den Verlust der alten Jobs ersetzen. Das ist ja die klassische Frage, dass man sagt, natürlich werden ganz viele neue Jobs geschaffen durch neue Entwicklungen, aber es gehen eben auch alte verloren. Und die Angst ist ja groß, dass zu viele traditionelle Jobs verloren gehen. Und ich frage Sie, wie groß ist Ihr Optimismus, dass sich diese Bilanz am Ende ausgeht und dass sozusagen was Positives herauskommt?
Hello. First, I just want to say thank you for having me here. It's such an honor to be on the stage with so many distinguished speakers. And a little bit of background before I answer the question. My company is a social media agency based in New York City. We're 7.5 years old. When I was in school, the social media industry did not exist. So it was just through experience that I was able to embrace and get into the industry. And for the students and the scholars here, the jobs and the problems that you're going to be solving in the future, we probably don't know all of them right now. For the parents in the room, your kids are probably going to be entering brand new industries that we don't even know what they are going to be today. In terms of, so I make a lot of money based on Facebook. When Facebook came around in 2004, it was started in a college dorm room, which many of you know, and in 2007 or 8 opened up for businesses. And a mini economy was created around Facebook. And my company was one of those, one of the first 5 or 6 that was a social media agency. And since then, you know, Facebook is one of the biggest companies in the world. I think they employ over 18,000 employees around the world. But then also, there's other companies like mine that have sprung up everywhere for the economy built around it. I think the biggest thing in terms of the technological progress that we're on the cusp of is it's going to move faster and at a rate that we've never seen before in all of humanity. It's Moore's Law at work, but if you look just 13 years ago, you know, the iPhone wasn't around, it was the iPod. MySpace was the biggest platform. The Razor flip phone was the peak of mobile technology. Broadband, Bluetooth was the future of the internet. And then fast forward only 13 years, we've got cryptocurrencies, we're talking about the commercial space industry, in 5 years we'll have self-driving cars, and the list goes on and on and on of the technologies that we have right now. One of the most transformative technologies that's going to impact almost every industry is going to be AI, artificial intelligence. And it's not necessarily this horrible thing, because it can augment human productivity. But the thing that's scary about it is well, I have a stat to share with you. There was a presidential report in 2016 for the Obama administration, and economists forecast the likelihood of wage earners who will lose jobs to automation. They didn't give a time frame, but if for those who made $40 or more, it was a 4% chance that they would lose their jobs to automation. If you made up to $40 per hour, it's about a 31% chance that you'll lose your job to automation. If you made $20 per hour or less, there's an 83% chance that you'll lose your job to automation. It's a really high percentage. And the biggest challenge is to really get ready for that through education and retraining and looking at all of that. The current administration, Rex Tillerson was asked, what do you think about automation? And his reply was, oh, it's not even on our radar. We're about to enter the most transformative technological advancement, and the US isn't even thinking about that. Will that stop new jobs from being created? I don't think so. I think there's the speed at which it's going to happen is probably going to rock us a little bit, but I think what is there, the necessity is the fountain of all invention. I think if there's a will, there's a way, but it's going to take work, and we're not really prone to change this fast. I think for the Industrial Revolution, we had 75 years. We're not going to have that luxury. We're going to have self-driving cars in 5 years, if not sooner. So I think more jobs and economies will be created around these new industries, but I think we really have to prepare for them.
Okay, thanks very much. Ja, vielleicht von der Zukunft noch einen Sprung zurück in die Gegenwart, und ich hätte den Herrn Friedl gebeten, wir wissen vielleicht nicht so genau, wie Europa, also wie auch der Wirtschaftsstandort Europa aus amerikanischer Sicht gesehen wird. Und Sie haben ja sehr viele Kontakte mit amerikanischen Unternehmen, und ich bitte Sie, uns ein bisschen zu berichten, also weil wir uns eben oft fragen, wenn wir mit den Amerikanern nicht wollen, wird sich dann alles nach Asien verlagern, oder haben wir als Europa auch in die Zukunft gesehen einen gewissen Stellenwert ökonomisch betrachtet, wo auch Amerikaner sagen, Europa ist für uns unverzichtbar als Handelspartner, und ich meine es jetzt nicht auf die Trump-Administration bezogen, sondern wir haben ja schon im anderen Arbeitskreis darüber gesprochen, wir wollen darüber hinausdenken. Und einfach ganz grundsätzlich, wie sieht man die europäische Wirtschaft, wo sieht man Stärken, wo sieht man Schwächen, und welche Zukunft wird diese Gemeinsamkeit haben?
If you don't mind, I would also speak in English, actually, out of respect for the panel, if it's okay for you.
Thanks very much. For me,
and then
okay.
One of the translators can go home and have a beer, so it's...
But this is one job.
Okay. She has to do both? That's terrible. Okay. Talking about jobs. No, maybe one thing I would like to say at the beginning still is, and we have to talk about Trump, and we have to talk about the position of the United States in the global economy. And a lot of times people say, so has the United States under this administration, and then I will talk about the European Union and the relationship, have they withdrawn from the global arena of world economy? Just because Trump is talking, he doesn't like TPP, he wants to end NAFTA, America first, American jobs for Americans, NATO is bad. You heard about what he said at the EU meeting. So basically it's like protectionism, the pure protectionism that comes out of his mouth. Two things, yes. I would say if I see the United States economy as a soccer team, The trainer of that soccer team has changed, but it's still the number one soccer team in the world. It's still the number one economy in the world, and they still have built up certain industries, research and development. It's the technology center number one. It's a startup center number one. So this is nothing that can be just changed by some tweets of one guy in the White House, at least not in the short run. That's what I think, and in the medium run. Talking about NAFTA, if he wants to pull out of NAFTA, and they are starting now negotiations with Canada and Mexico, and they're both happy to do that, Mexico and Canada. But again, this is not a decision that will be done by the President of the United States, unless it's about national security, and that's something we maybe have to consider, that there might be something happening that makes him think, oh, there is a national security issue now suddenly on the platter. But this is a decision that has to be done by the Congress, by the Senate and the House of Representatives. And I've said it before, we have 11 states bordering Canada and we have 4 states bordering Mexico. These are 15 states represented by 2 senators, that's 30 senators, that's a third of the American Senate. So they might have, some of them, a little bit of a different opinion about NAFTA, about free trade, etc. So I would take it with a pinch of salt, and I know that's very difficult when you read a tweet at 3 o'clock in the morning and you think yourself, okay, but you have to take it with a pinch of salt. The Europeans, what they do, they took it with a pinch of salt. I have the feeling, especially Austrian companies, gave him the benefit of the doubt at the beginning because he had some suggestions about strengthening the American economy. It was about deregulation, and the US is one of the most bureaucratic countries that I've lived in, especially certain parts. So for every one new regulation, he would take back 2 old regulations. Another thing is a tax reform. It's a highly taxed country. The taxes are different in all 50 states. You have taxes on a state level, on a municipal level, on a city level sometimes. So a tax reform would make sense. And the third thing is an infrastructure investment package of $1 billion. $1 trillion, sorry, yeah, and a billion, yeah, $1 trillion. Which, if you've been to the United States or New York, you know that this is very necessary. So they gave him the benefit of the doubt. In the first 4 or 5 months, nothing of this has been put into place because he was busy with other things that were either overturned by the courts, like immigration ban, or that could not be passed through the Senate, like Obamacare or the new healthcare law. So let's take it. Let's see what really happens. And again, decisions, especially in the economic realm, are not only made by the president. They're made on a state level. So Austrian companies, European companies very often look at what's happening in Georgia, actually, what's happening in Texas, what's happening in North Carolina, with their taxes, with their laws, with their social laws, with their incentive programs. How is Europe viewed? It depends on who you talk to, obviously. It depends on how is Trump viewed by European companies. If you talk to a textile machine manufacturer in South Carolina, the people he deals with have a different opinion about Trump than if you talk about an interior architect in Brooklyn. He would tell you something different about Trump. But the view of the European Union, I read a couple of articles lately, despite what Trump said in Brussels, I think the business community still knows that the European Union is the most important partner for the United States. It's the biggest investment destination for the United States, also the other way around. It is basically more than 1/3 of trade volume worldwide is between the EU and the US. Without TTIP, already without TTIP. So if there was a TTIP, you might think that this might even increase. Trump sees himself as a deal maker, so if he can't make a deal with Europe, he might make a deal with somebody else. He's now making deals with Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. That seems to be the new friend. Let's see where that goes. Russia could be a new friend. There were times when people said it's very good that the US is talking to Russia. When I grew up, I'm also older, I remember, I think it was 79, they had one of the first meetings, Russia and the US in Vienna, and everybody was actually happy that these two people talk to each other. I'm not defending what's happening right now with the whole Russia scandal, but there was a time when people thought, like, actually, why would it be a bad thing if the US and Russia is discussing politics and talks about, you know, maybe solving problems in the Middle East? I mean, it depends, again, on the people who are acting.
Thanks very much. At this point, a short break, because you have brought us in a quite difficult situation. Because in respect to the panel, we can do this all in English. For me, it's okay, and I think we can do it. But we also have, in respect to the audience, so we have translation, and it is right for you. I just asked this question. I mean, it's a question you can't deny, but anyway. Okay, and this is organized, and we can go on in English as we like. Okay. Thanks very much. So this is...
We're talking about Trump, but I have put you in a difficult position.
Yeah, but you were talking about Trump, but it wasn't asked. I asked you the role of Europe and how it is seen, but you answered, and it's all, I think it's quite perfect. So next thing is, I would ask you, Michael Plummer, about Russia was a good topic, and also Africa, because in this round we have on the one side Europe, on the other side Asia, and the US in between, but it is terra incognita Africa, and we don't know how to deal with. So what are you expecting about this area and this continent? Will this be a very important player in a few years, or is this not the case? How do you think it will be the development?
That's a great question. I always remember I work a lot in Southeast Asia, and people used to always say about Indonesia that it's a country with great potential and always will be. I think that with Africa, it's a continent of great potential, and it's not clear if it's going to be able to reach that potential, essentially for political reasons. I think the biggest problem in Africa tends to be political. Yeah. And this is it is a real tragedy. It certainly isn't trade, because, you know, the European Union allows imports duty-free, duty quota-free through the Everything But Arms initiative, and the United States does the same through the African Growth and Opportunities Act. Yeah. The problem is that politically it is such that there's such political uncertainty, et cetera, that we're not seeing sufficient investments in things. Even South Africa, which had all that promise with the, you know, after apartheid, is having difficulties in terms of politics. I think the big problem with Africa is political, but, you know, if that can be overcome, I think it's very, it is very possible. I'm looking at some long-term data. In 1970, talking about convergence, in 1970, the poverty rate in Asia and in Africa was approximately the same. It was like about 35% had per capita incomes under $1. It was huge. And in Africa it was about 39%, but about the same. You fast forward it to 2000, and so that was even a while ago. In Asia, it had gone down to something like 11%, and that includes South Asia. East Asia, much less. 750 million people in China alone have been able to go above that. In Africa, it's gone up to 50%, and that's a real human tragedy.
Yes, and therefore we see that the economics also have the political challenges, and we talked about education later in the afternoon. And so I ask you if this development of the digitalization and so on, this will be too fast perhaps for the economic structures we have at that time here in, as well perhaps in US, but also here in Europe. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the comment about Africa made me think of something.
You can also go to the African part.
Well, I mentioned this earlier, but it's important to think about the digital divide and connectivity. We assume the U.S. is all high tech because that's the, you know, I rattled off like 20 things that we're working on that sound like they're out of sci-fi movies. But the reality is 3% of the United States is still using dial-up internet, which is the slowest thing on the planet. It's like but there's a real issue with people within the United States being able to have access to the internet. I don't know what the stats are here in Austria, but I'm on 3G with my phone, which seems really slow to me. But then even in the connected world, which isn't the what are the stats? 3.7 billion people can log on. That's about 50% of the planet. But 4 billion people on the planet still are not accessing the internet. And there's large populations in Africa. And of the ones that are logging on, that doesn't mean they have great internet access. They might have, live within a signal, but it might not be, 3G, for example. So it's a U.S. issue that this digital divide exists, and I think in terms of economic opportunity, that's something that has to be addressed. And one reason to go back to your education system is there's many aspects of education through our primary, secondary, and upper ed, but a lot of education happens online and digitally, so you need access digitally to that education too. But in general, to expand on this a little bit more, our education system was really designed for the Industrial Revolution, and at least in the lower ed, to help us move from an agricultural society to an industrialized one. That hasn't changed much to help us prepare for the future in terms of being able to address problems that we do not yet know what they are. So I think that's something that should be addressed, but also how we think about retraining in the future. It might not be a 4-year college, or it might be ongoing training. Who will pay for that? Fritz brought this up earlier. That's a conversation too. But I think it's absolutely necessary part of the culture to move forward to embrace the technology that's coming.
Thank you very much. I give the question of digital divide to you.
Yes, I'm going to have to take issue with some of the comments that my friend Helen made. First of all, our education system is dependent upon a political system. And the political system that we have in America gives or takes away. Education cannot be delivered without funds, without money to deliver it. And one of the most critical issues that we've been facing in the United States is the issue of education funding. Our schools are not funded to the level to which they need to be. And we are, in the public schools, we have to deal with the population that we have. So I work for the teachers' union, the Lehrergewerkschaft, and I represent 180,000 teachers just in Pennsylvania, 3.2 million in America, public school teachers. Those teachers have to go into a school classroom and deal with the situation that they have on the ground. For example, in the cities, we have a poverty problem that you can't imagine here in Austria, where we have people, classrooms with 80%, 90% of the children are under the poverty level. They haven't had breakfast. Their only meal of the day is going to be in school, and we don't know what's going to happen to them after they leave the school building. How can we begin to talk about a digital revolution for them? They don't connect to the internet because they can't afford to connect to the internet. I don't know if you knew this, but internet costs are about they're about 4 times as much in America as they are here. I can connect to the internet for 10 euros a month here, right? Mm-hmm. No problem. Yeah. It's $50, $60 a month. Someone who lives in poverty cannot do that. So explain to me, how am I going to deliver a digital education? How am I going to improve those people's lives? I can't leapfrog that far ahead. I have to bring those people up to the standard that we are at before I can have the discussion with you about how we're going to change the system.
Yeah, but we have to find answers to that questions, because that's what is interesting. When I listen to your stories, I think we are going back to Middle Age, perhaps, if there are so many people who can't take part in our society, at least. And that's what, I mean, you have asked the questions, but have you some solutions, some answers? What is to do even in the political area?
Well,
a policy.
I have some suggestions, yes.
Yes.
Number one, we have to, in America, come to the agreement that public education is a social good, that we have to commit our resources to this social fabric, the foundation of our country. We're not doing that. That is not happening in America. Instead, the opposite is happening. We have a new Secretary of Education under Trump, Secretary Betsy DeVos. Never set foot in a public school classroom. None of her family went to public school. She's not a teacher. She has no connection to education. And further, she would like to privatize our public schools because our public schools aren't doing a good job. So instead of taking the problem and saying, well, let's fix our problem, let's put resources in, instead it's take it away. So number one, we have to commit that education is a social good for everybody, and we have to provide the resources. Number two, we have to make changes in the structure of the delivery system, of how we're delivering our education. Because you're right, our school system is set up to deliver education just for business. In other words, it's an output-driven education system. America wants its students to graduate to go do a job. Instead of, maybe the answer should be, America wants its students to go out and be able to learn, and be able to critically think, and be able to critically apply the digital tools that we have. But that's not what America wants right now. We want some widget to do a job for the corporation. And number three, we have to get our parents of our children to commit to the education of their children. Because what's happening now, and I can tell you this on the ground from the stories that my teachers tell me, they blame the teacher for the child not doing the homework. So, I mean, how can you continue like this? Okay, so I don't assign any homework, no problem.
It might be the answer on the question before, that the jobs created by the digitalization are teachers, perhaps. I mean, this is a good job you did now here. But yeah, I wanted to, you want to have a comment on this? Yes, feel free.
No, I have a short comment, but maybe
no problem.
if I don't like your question, I'll do the comment longer.
No, let's go on like that. It's okay.
No, I mean, I'm not an educational expert, but the US being what it is, what you said about internet access, for instance, for poorer communities or rural communities or schools, there's now really a lot of private initiatives and non-profit organizations that provide fast internet to particular regions of cities and provide even laptops. So it's like the US has their own internal development aid system run by non-profit organizations. So I mean, this is fantastic. Another thing, what I also like about it, we in Austria have that system of dual education, the Lehrlingsausbildung, where companies work together with schools, and when I talk to Austrian subsidiaries in Georgia and South Carolina, very often they say, there's a lot of centers of excellence in the US. You have the best universities, you have fantastic students coming out. There's also some schools that are not so good. But something in the middle, people who know how to work on a machine, who know how to produce something, that is very hard to find. And because of the visa system, and I suppose it's going to be more difficult under Trump, it's even difficult to bring people from Austria, for instance, to these Austrian companies to do these jobs. So there's a private initiative now by these Austrian companies working with colleges, vocational training, to really start grassroots training programs, and then these people get a guaranteed job. Eipler, Bloom, these are two very good examples from Vorarlberg in that industry, in that company. And that's something that starts basically on the private level.
That's quite interesting. Thanks very much. And I give to you the question when I hear these stories from Mr. Fekete. Then on the other side, US for us is the country of Facebook, of Google, and of Silicon Valley. And so for Europeans, this is so the advanced economic room. And this is a gap between those stories. So is it like that the education system is not so good, but although there are coming up these startups and so on, the digital economy, how to explain this topic?
I think, well, first of all, the U.S. educational system is so diverse.
Yeah.
There are excellent public schools and there are horrible public schools. I think that fundamentally the problem, and it'd be great to get Fritz's input, is that education, public education, elementary through high school, is financed by local property taxes in the United States. And so what that means is that rich communities can afford rich public schools. I used to live in Lexington in Boston, in the Boston area, and it was literally the houses were much more expensive there because they had a very good public high school. It was easier to get into Harvard, right? So it was you had a lot of money dedicated to it. In the Detroit area where I'm from, in the suburbs, they spent quite a bit of money locally because they had it on high schools, where in Detroit there wasn't any. And so the outcomes obviously are going to be that way. So what needs to happen is you need to have this either be done at the federal level or better at the state level as a way of sort of supporting the system, because it is definitely underfunded. In terms of the output, I think that what I like about the US system better, to the extent there is one, is that it does focus much more on thinking and on creativity. I think in the standard, what I know of the European systems, I know the Italian one well, and the French one, it tends to be, I think they get very solid tools, but creativity isn't always rewarded the way it should be. And I think that in the US often, the tools are less focused on, and often they'll be, being creative is an important thing. And it doesn't need to be that everybody has to be creative. It takes certain people that sort of, that stand out and become creative. So I think that the problem I have sometimes in the European system is as strong as the systems can be too much, it tends to be too strict, too rote memorization, too much jumping through these hoops because that's what we did 50 years ago. And that's good for some things, but you need to have a positive experience in the classroom if you're going to love to learn. If you have a bad experience in the classroom, you're not going to get that.
Okay, coming back a little bit to global economy, we have today the situation that Mr. Trump will announce what about climate change contract, and that perhaps US will leave this contract or leave in some parts of this contract. So can you give us a view on that development? How will it change the economic structure?
Well, I think First of all, as we were discussing earlier, a big problem with the climate change mitigation is a classic public choice problem. Just like deficit spending. You know, if I can deficit spend, I'm a politician, I can deficit spend, and I can buy more votes today, I will do it. Who cares 10 years from now if that debt has to be paid off? I'm going to do that choice. And, you know, 10, 20 years later, we pay for it. We certainly are in Italy right now. So that's a problem. The climate change is exactly the opposite problem in that why should I pay a cost today which will be, you know, some politician 15, you know, the society 15, 20 years from now when I'm politically dead, it will pay a return. I think that to some degree explains what we've seen in various U.S. administrations which have consistently dodged this question about what needs to be done and sort of having good carbon permit trading and these sorts of things. And I think that traditionally the Republicans have not always bought on to climate change, and once they did, how to address it has been sort of flip-flopping. And I think that my view is, and I'm obviously not an expert, but looking what came out of the discussions in Sicily, et cetera, is that there must be a doubt in the president's mind about withdrawing from this accord, and that there is going to be a large political price to pay from doing so, not just locally, but also with partners. On the other hand, he's made some pretty strong statements about what he thinks about that accord. So my prediction is he's going to try to muddle through somehow. That would be my prediction.
What is your expectation to that?
I predict at 9 p.m. We will see that the U.S. is out, and here's why. Because Mr. Trump is going to play to his base back in America, and his base doesn't believe in climate change, or shall I say man-made climate change, because God will take care of climate change. I'm not, you know, this sounds funny, but I mentioned the coal miners earlier. The coal miners voted for Trump because he did not sign on to any idea of climate change, because, you know, coal's cool, you know, coal doesn't matter. We can blow some more smoke up there. It doesn't affect anything because we're not causing it, because there is some question, some scientists, you know, 2% or 1% or 1 or 2, I don't know, say maybe it's not the problem, right? So my prediction, yes, we're going to exit today, and even though there might be a international political price, probably, you know, I don't think that matters, because I believe that Trump and the Republicans currently in office are going to, they believe they're going to stay in office through precisely the people that they have spoken to over the last 15 months and the people that will continue to turn out for them in those elections. Think about the Trump rallies. Why does Trump continue to go out and have rallies? It's a continual campaign. If he doesn't sign on to if he signs on to or continues the Paris change, he looks like an idiot. Yeah. That's not going to happen. So that's my prediction. I hope I'm wrong, but you know, there you go.
I could say now that whenever a politician has the choice between bad news and fake news, he takes the fake news, isn't it? But yeah, but I asked to you, how is that to explain that one can believe in that different realities? Because, I mean, this is the internet and so on, the echo chambers, and we know about this mechanism. But what can you, I ask you as a media agency who is dealing with that technology, how could you perhaps influence a little bit in the good way, I have to say now, but because there are so many realities in the internet, and you know, the problem is big, and we don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, that is, and I know an earlier workshop addressed this too, so I'd be curious to hear what they discussed. It's very multifaceted. There's not one answer or one approach. And I must say, for the journalists and the papers and the media that are following journalistic ethics and following their code, and I give them so much credit right now because they are under the gun constantly, but they are doing their job and continuing to do it. From the journalism side, really an interesting tactic, and I've heard the editor of the Washington Post speak. I got to meet him, and I've heard the editor of the New York Times speak. They're actually not worried about Trump. They're like, what he says, we have to cover him because he's president, but he's not influencing our work. We just have to continue to work. One tactic that they're taking to reinforce real journalism is to actually be more transparent about how stories are created. Journalists that cover, war-torn conflicts, they're putting their lives at risk versus someone on Breitbart who's making up news stories about whatever they want. So being more transparent about what goes into true journalism is one tactic that they're doing there was one story about someone sharing notes about a story on Twitter and getting feedback. So I think from the journalism side, their main thing is we're going to keep working and doing what we do, and using some tactics to be a little bit more transparent. From a platform standpoint, you have Facebook, you have Google. We only really go to Twitter to see Trump's tweets these days. But how we get our news is through an algorithm. And it's the companies, you have Facebook, a private company, and you have Google, a private company, that have designed these algorithms to determine as a user what is most important to you, therefore what information is going to show up in your feed. And this is how echo chambers get built. They try to show diversity, but the golden chalice for them, their business model is on engagement. We engage with content that we like and that we see, therefore we see more of that. On my Facebook feed, I don't get much Fox News. I have to actively, go and seek Fox News. And you have two different realities within Facebook. I mean, everyone experiences Facebook, for example, differently. In terms of the platforms, they are taking action to combat fake news because it is a problem, and they've acknowledged it in some ways. One thing that they're doing is working with third parties to rate the stories. So if it's been disputed as fake news, then you'll get a notification or a little flag. Because one of the issues that we saw with this past election is that a Breitbart news piece or completely fake news is side by side a reputable news source. So just from a visual standpoint, these two pieces of news look equal. So from, I spoke about the digital divide, there's a digital literacy issue as well of being able to distinguish these. So the platforms are showing, flagging something so that you can see. There's an incentivization issue that happens. You have, I call them fake news profiteers, where it was some kid in the US, you saw some, I forget where, in Eastern Europe, that would just make up these stories, no matter how unbelievable, and share them because they were making ad dollars from them, making thousands of dollars. So one of the things Google and Facebook is doing this too is taking away the incentive where they're not making money. They're not showing their ads on Facebook, they're not showing their ads on the platforms. So there are steps. One thing I would love to see all of the major platforms do is have third-party watchdogs for their algorithms, because the content that we consume and helps inform our worldview is through these content lenses where we receive information, whether traditional television, whether through the newspaper or whether through Facebook or Google. And the algorithms that are determining this are made by humans, and there's ethical and moral decision making happening, and we're putting all of that into the hands of corporations without any third-party watchdogs. So I'm a big advocate for third-party watchdogs. Personally, we also have to be much more diligent about checking our sources, making sure that we're not spreading fake news. There was actually, there's so many things that come out every day, it's hard to keep them all straight. But even with some of the ISIS stuff, you have to be really careful about what you share and ask yourself, who is this going to benefit? Am I spreading fake news and to the benefit of an organization I don't want to support? So really being diligent, check your sources, and before you share, ask yourself, who is going to benefit from me sharing this information? So those are a couple things. It's, there's a lot more tactics out there, but I hope that's a quick summary.
Yeah. Thanks very much. So I would have a short view in the audience. Perhaps there are some comments or some questions you will ask to us, and we start here. Please, I don't know if a micro, yes. So please wait for the micro, and you can give me a sign up from now, here in third row. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Merlik. I'm from Armenia. I would like to address my question on Mr. Plummer. So we have talked about public schools in the U.S., and you have said that the main focus is creativity. And I will go back to the climate change. For me, creativity is something like the process of investing the present moment in a way that our creativity becomes or betters of the future. Why this formula doesn't work or is not working when it comes to climate change? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think because at the moment there's no.
That's, of course, an important question to ask. But just like very creative things that don't get picked up in the market end up not going anywhere, if you've got creative things that are not picked up by policymakers and are not supported, they're not going to go very far. And I think that even though there seems to be a lot of interesting ways of dealing with climate change mitigation and these things that are very creative, it's just inconvenient to certain politicians. Or a better way to say it is that the issue does not have the kind of political support that it needs to go forward. And I mean, it's like even in trade, if we come back to trade negotiations, do special interests guide trade negotiations? Absolutely, but if there were no special interests, there'd be no trade agreements, right? So it's a mixture of these things. So it really depends on what kind of political support the creativity is getting, I would think.
Thanks very much. Any comments, any questions? Not at the moment. You can go on perhaps later, or sorry, I haven't seen you.
Thank you. As well as I'm aware, the US spends the second most per pupil out of all of the countries except Switzerland. I agree that the distribution is a problem at the state level, but I know that certain states like Arkansas and North Carolina are coming up with equitable funding formulas at the local level. In my opinion, and I am a teacher, I've taught in the US, I've taught in Germany, I've also taught in Austria. I think that the problem is deeper than that. I think it lies in the public perception and the respect of the teaching profession. And I would love to hear some comments from the panel about if there are any plans in place, or if you can see a future where the teaching profession is elevated in the US, and if you think that this plays into a greater solution, because I don't really think that money is the root of it, and looking at how much we spend per pupil is a sign of that.
Thank you. Perhaps Mr. Fekete?
I guess it's going to be mine.
Yes.
Yeah, I come from a family of teachers, and I can tell you that what I have seen regarding the respect of the teaching profession decline in America it's shocking. I don't know to what degree. I think it has declined to some degree in Austria. I have some friends and relatives that are teaching here as well. I can speak to, from the teachers' union perspective, do we have plans or projects in place to increase the esteem of the teacher in the public arena? And the answer is yes, but it's a guarded yes, because the problem that we are having is that the politicians, at least in the United States, have us constantly on our heels. We don't have enough time to do promotion of education because we're trying to defend education. We're trying to defend the pay, the benefits, the retirement of teachers from being stripped away. We're trying to defend their rights from being stripped away. So it's very difficult politically to have to try to have an active promotion of the profession while you're constantly on your heels. And I wish I had a better answer than that. But I would go back to my 3 points that I made earlier about first of all, acknowledging and agreeing as a community of the importance of a public education. That in and of itself is going to raise the esteem level of teaching. Number two, for the politicians to commit resources to that. And number three, for parents to also accept and commit to the education of their children. I think if we follow those three things, you will see the esteem level of the education profession naturally rise. But we've got to be able to get back off of our heels and stop fighting defense in order for them to make that happen.
Thank you. So perhaps I will also, do you want to ask a question? Yes, please.
Thank you. I have a question that's related to the title of the session about Weltwirtschaft, Quo Vadis, and the many themes that we've heard over the last couple of days of cultural narratives, also climate change, the economy, the worries about does the economy grow, etc. And so there was one sentence that you, Mr. Sittingerr, used. You wrote, you said, at some point, I took the note of it, the need to fight, Bekämpfung des schwachen Wachstums, so to fight the weak growth, weak economic growth. Under the assumptions, it seems like we all share this common assumption, growth, economic growth is good, more growth is better, etc. But if we put that together with, the worries about climate change that we're talking about, in some way it seems to me that at some point it's difficult to reconcile, even though we try to not talk about it or try not to look at it. And I wonder whether any of you have any thoughts about the gap between.
Thanks for this question, because we are returning now a little bit more to global economy. Perhaps Mr. Friedl, may I propose that you give some ideas to this topic?
Yeah, I was fearing that. I mean, there's different ways of calculating economic growth, and I think this is what you're getting to. What is this? Should we rank countries by economic growth or by GDP volume? Is that what makes a country good? Is the richest country the best country? The richest country is the US. Is the US the best country? Well, we've been discussing it now for an hour and a half. Maybe not in education, maybe not in environmental policy, maybe not in poverty reduction in certain states, but it has the #1 GDP. where is the fastest economic growth at the moment? I think it's in a place like Qatar, and there's another and 3 or 4 of these countries with the fastest economic growth are in Africa. Does this mean that everybody who lives in these countries is leading a wonderful life, is having good prospects, economic prospects? Is the distribution of wealth equally done in these countries? I don't know, but I doubt it. There's an index of happiness. The happiest country in the world is Bhutan. Do we all want to live in Bhutan? Maybe, maybe not. Do we want to visit it? Yes. So I give you a very long answer without giving you an answer. I should be a diplomat. But I think, yes, you have to look at other criteria to really say, is economic growth the one thing that determines what we should strive for? And what do you calculate into economic growth? We have, when we talk about trade, and I'm not a trained economist, I just talk like a trained economist. But when you talk about the Ricardo system or theorem, that whoever has the highest productivity in a particular thing they're doing, they should do it to avoid opportunity costs, and then these 2 countries trade. Now decisions are made not according to this principle anymore. Trump wants to produce steel in the US, although it would be much cheaper to import it from China. And it would probably help the American economy to import it from China, but there's a political decision. There are other promises he has to keep, and I'm not just talking about Trump, in general. So I think this discussion is something we can continue during dinner.
No, this is really great because it's a philosophic lesson now a little bit, and it's not so bad for the economy. I mean, yes, please.
I think it is an interesting issue. I think that, well, first of all, I think also you were kind of pointing out the fact we've got faster growth, that's going to be bad for the environment, right? And so the question is how to deal with that issue. But I think there was a big fear about, with greater globalization, that you'd see environmental dumping. Larry Summers, when he was chief economist of the World Bank, this is before he became Clinton's Secretary of Treasury, got his ears boxed back for writing a memo at the World Bank saying that the logic behind environmental dumping was, the economic logic behind environmental dumping was impeccable. Because, for various reasons we can go into, but obviously that lends itself to a lot of problems. And I don't think anyone would accept that. But it does underscore the importance of corporate social responsibility. I think this is something that has emerged that's very positive. Fritz mentioned the Bangladesh problem. There is Bhopal in India. There is the sweatshops in some Vietnam and things. And what's happening is the lights are being shown on these things, right? All of a sudden, people are finding out about it. And when Nike says in Vietnam, well, we didn't know, all of a sudden, they're getting very bad publicity. And investors themselves are now putting pressure on these companies to care, right? To make sure they know what's going on, to make sure that the workplace is safe, because if something happens, it's going to be really bad for them. And so in a way, this is a positive thing. I think also the environmental aspect of it's important. With new environmental technologies, often it doesn't cost much more to have the more efficient technologies when you're going to developing countries. And I think that with this big movement towards greater corporate social responsibility, you're going to see more of that, because if it comes out that they are actually increasing their contributions to greenhouse gases or something like that through those policies, that there's going to be a price to pay.
But according to that, there was the definition of what is the aim of economy, and once, I don't know who it was who said, is giving the best life possible to the greatest number of people. And is this now still this aim, or is it climate change and perhaps solidarity or some other values?
Well, I think that it depends on what best means.
Yeah.
I think that there are so many, what we call in economics, externalities. The problem is, and I think this is what he was getting to too, is that when you have growth, there are certain costs that are not endogenized. In the sense that if it pollutes, there's a cost to that. This is why we sort of tax it, and we should be taxing it and these sorts of things. That's important. But also I would say even in the social realm, this ends up becoming very important as well when we're kind of thinking what is going to be the best system. It could very well be, you know, the better system is one that accepts a somewhat lower growth rate in terms of the numbers, because of the fact that you internalize this cost associated with pollution. That, from an economic point of view, when you include all social costs, that would be a much more accurate way of measuring growth. But having said that, I think these measures of happiness, when I was at the OECD, they were putting out their measure of happiness and these things. I just don't think it could be done very well. And especially if you give it to economists, we'll certainly screw it up somehow.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much. I'm looking for the last time. I see here, you, please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Dražen. I'm from Bosnia, living now for 15 years in Austria. When we talk about economy and politics, there is one question that seems to be kind of maybe hidden, or maybe I'm totally out of the topic, but I will still want to ask it. And it's a financial question. We all know that the currency, the inflation, happens from the moment where the currency was backed up by gold, and it's not anymore. So we have, the money loses its value, you know. So, and there is tendency, and there is a lot of financial experts talking about the next big financial bubble. Maybe it's coming in 5, 15, 10 years, who knows. But the indications are there that it's going to happen, because the gap between, you know, the very, very rich and the very, very poor is rising. So it's a fact. What I would like to know is this up for debate? Are the experts on this particular area aware of this, and what are the measures, if this is at all for a debate? Is it a subject at all? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have to apologize a little bit, because it's a pity we haven't Robert Holzmann with us at the panel. He's a little bit ill, and therefore he's not here with us, but I don't know who is to answer this question, because I fear that we are not quite the real experts, but
well,
give it to you.
You know, the gold standard was, you know, destroyed during World War II and has never come back. And the reason being that if you base your liquidity creation on gold, on a metal, it can be very contractionary. You have liquidity problems and things like that, and that's why we've got fiat money, essentially, which is, as you mentioned, it's based on, you know, the willingness to hold onto these things. And so the question becomes, of course, what inflation is. It's the erosion of the value of money relative to goods and services. But actually, interestingly, of late, the problem has been, and we economists, we've got lots of ways of analyzing inflation. We have very poor tools of how to analyze the opposite. In other words, deflation. And this was a problem until very recently. About, you know, we had negative interest rates in Europe, right? We had everywhere, because of the fact that the opposite was happening. Actually, the value of money was rising, you know, relative to goods and services and things. So I don't see any change in that. But what I find is fascinating, and I must say that I'm not an expert, is that there is competition now to fiat money being created by central banks. And I think you mentioned it earlier with these, you know, Bitcom and these other things. All of a sudden, they're giving competition to it. So there is a that I think is a very new trend. I'm not sure how far it'll go, but it's very interesting. But I think for now we are going to continue to have the same sort of fiat money approach to things. And if I could add one more thing, since we were talking about a bit about leadership earlier, a problem has to do with exchange rate changes. Okay, this was a big thing that Donald Trump was talking about currency manipulation was the buzzword and everything. I mean, how do we deal with exchange rates? And, you know, we could talk about what that means. And, for example, by definition, the United States can't be a currency manipulator. Because if your currency is a reserve currency like the dollar, you don't have to worry about it, which doesn't make much sense. But I think what is important is that when we have large swings in exchange rates, this can cause problems. It used to be, we economists like Milton Friedman and others would say, look, don't worry about the exchange rates. Let them float. If we've got a common inflation rate, exchange rates will be stable. Instead, Europe and the United States, we have had very common inflation rates, and exchange rates have been going like this. I mean, when I got married in 2001, it was about 90 US cents to the euro. At one point, I think it was 2011, it was $1.60. My poor wife, right? And then now it's come down. Now, the US is a relatively closed economy in the sense that trade isn't that important in the economy. Europe, if you look at it outside the euro, it's relatively closed as well. Southeast Asia, 100% of GDP is based on trade, okay? I mean, of course, some double counting with trade, imports and exports. Anyway, extremely exposed. So when they've got these exchange rate swings, that is really problematic for them, how to manage it. So again, we've got a problem in that we don't have any leadership in how to manage international exchange rates, and there's a big cost to doing that.
Thanks very much.
Something to that. You had mentioned the wage gap, and it's something that you see a lot in the U.S. If you look at Silicon Valley, however, it's not a very big area by square footage or mileage, but it has produced the most billionaires that we've ever seen. And you hear stories, Apple is, within 18 months, might be the first $1 trillion company. Like, there is large wealth creation. And you think, oh, our economy must be great. And I mentioned this earlier, but it's actually kind of hard to answer the question, how is the economy doing? Because it depends on what you're looking at. If you look at the stock market, yeah. If you look at unemployment going down, yeah, it looks good. If you look at wage being stagnant, that's, doesn't make the economy look so great. And you hear the stories about all these, overnight when Facebook IPO'd, billionaires are made, like overnight. But in the majority of the country, how they view the economy is looking what their friends are doing, looking at their paycheck, and looking at their towns. And it's a personal perspective of how the economy is personally impacting them. So I think in, the challenges between education, connectivity, wealth distribution, and to Mike's point about leadership, you see there's been a couple of suggestions about wealth distribution, but you see within some of these tech billionaires how they want to, they've taken a pledge to redistribute their wealth and are doing all this. It might be interesting to see if they tackle the subject from a corporate leadership perspective of wealth redistribution. But I think it's going to be absolutely critical to address that.
What are you going to do with your first billion?
Important question. Okay, I think so far I can say we are coming at the end now. It happened what we expected a little bit based on the experience in our last round, that when we talk about economy, we talk automatically about education, and this is important to know and to take with us. Thanks for your attention here, and thanks for the presentations on stage. I think Herbig Hösele has to make an announcement. Thank you.